Okay, good morning. Let's see if I've got the volume up here. I want to assume that y'all can hear me. I don't know. I'm assuming my volume is going up, but we'll just see. So the little microphone thing is working. Okay. So welcome back from fall break. I hope you had time to get things done and have a little bit of a rest and a break from the routine. We are going to continue our discussion on chapter 24 today on metabolism. And I anticipate if we don't finish it today, we'll definitely finish it on Monday. So just to let you know where we are with that. So that'll be the end of unit 2. So and then our pace is going to start picking up because the contents of the chapters, the number of slides we have to go through drops significantly because we're going to get into some and it's also going to be a lot more interesting. So I'll just give you a heads up on that. So if you thought it was boring, and you're probably not alone in that thought on some of this stuff, don't worry, it's going to get real interesting real fast. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Oh, we have a comment. Let's see. You can hear me? Thank you. That's great. So good. I'm glad because I'm not getting my little sound bar doesn't seem to be working this morning. So, okay. Let's go ahead and let me go over and open up slides. So we had covered just about everything on fat. So I'm going to go ahead and take us right into the major nutrients, proteins. Let me get back to go. Okay. I think I'm going to be able to get this to open up for us. And okay, you all should see the screen that says major nutrients, proteins. We've been going through the nutrients here in this first half of metabolism. We've looked at the carbohydrates, we've looked at the lipids. Now we're going to take a look at proteins. All three of these are very important to us because we use, they each have specific uses. Carbohydrates, of course, are our fuel source. And we have the lipids for a variety of uses, including hormones and insulating the nerves and making putting together the cell membrane. Now we're looking at proteins. Now the protein sources are pretty specific. We can get them from animal sources and from plant sources. Now animal protein, things from eggs and milk, fish, meats, variety of dairy products. I said milk, but other things besides milk. There are a wide variety of animal sources. Now, animal sources are considered complete proteins. Complete protein has all 20 amino acids. Our bodies need all 20 amino acids. Our bodies need all 20 amino acids because protein synthesis will not occur if we don't have all the amino acids necessary. Now, we can't make all 20 on our own. There are 8 essential amino acids that we have to get from our diet. Now, complete proteins provide all of that for us, not a problem. You eat a piece of cheese, you eat a piece of chicken, you eat a piece of fish or beef, and you're going to get all your amino acids. Plant proteins are a little different. Plant proteins are incomplete proteins. If you eat corn, you're not going to get all 20 amino acids. You're not going to get all 8 essential amino acids that our bodies can't make. We can make them, but we can make 12, but there's 8 of them that we have to get in our diet. So if you eat corn, if you eat beans, if you eat nuts, and that's all you eat, you're not going to get all the amino acids, including the 8 essential amino acids that you have to have. So what you do, if you have a patient that doesn't eat food from an animal source, however you want to define that, you would advise them to eat combinations of plant sources. In other words, to get all the amino acids you need, including the 8 essential amino acids, you eat combinations. You eat beans and rice, legumes and cereal grains, beans and rice, or beans and corn, because beans are going to give you a certain number of amino acids, and corn will give you a certain number of amino acids, and the overlap of the two will give you all 8 essential amino acids. So a person who is a vegetarian, a vegan, has to plan their diet a little better, not a little better, but be a little more specific in their dietary choices to make sure they get all their amino acids, because there is no one plant source that gives you everything. So you mix and match. Any of the cereal grains, any of legumes, the beans and peas, not bees, but beans and peas. Any combination of beans and peas with a cereal grain will give you your all your amino acids. Now, what do we use them for? Well, proteins are used for just about everything in our bodies. The keratin, the waterproofing in our skin, the collagen. The most abundant protein in our body is collagen. And we find that everywhere. For strength and support, we find it making up all of our tendons and ligaments, where our muscles are joined to our bones. We use it to reinforce and strengthen our bones. So it's just about everywhere in our bodies. Elastin, the elastic protein that lets our skin rebound and return to its shape, that gives give to our arteries, so that when blood shoots through our arteries, the elastic fibers expand and we get this thing called a pulse in here. And of course, our muscles. Skeletal muscle is made up of contractile protein that can slide across each other. That's how they work. The same applies to cardiac muscle and to smooth muscle, made of contractile type proteins. Those are all structural. Now, functionally, we have the globular type proteins, the hormones, the enzymes, the squishy ones, the ones that can be very easily damaged by changes in temperature and pH. So we make a lot of protein. Our DNA that we have in the nucleus of the cell. We just talked about that at the end of chapter 3. Our DNA is essentially a user's manual to make all the proteins we need, because we are a giant mass of protein doing the things that our bodies need. It makes up the components of the skin, it makes up the structural support of the cells, it makes up all the hormones, and pulls on our bones, and pulls and contracts our muscles. So our DNA is a direction on how to make all the different proteins: hair color, eye color, skin color, hormones and stuff like that. So how much protein do you have to take in on a daily basis? Well, instead of trying to figure out 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, if you're like me, you have to make the conversion in your head from pounds to kilograms, and then you have to take multiply 0.8 grams by that. Just a rule of thumb is 50 grams a day is about what we need to take in on a daily basis. 50 grams a day, and that's sort of redundant, but 50 grams daily is what we need to take in. And what does that equate to? Well, it's probably like the meat portion of 2 quarter pounders or a Whopper, just the meat part of it there, is about 50 grams on a daily basis. It is ironic that the greatest source of protein for our bodies is also usually the most expensive, because animal protein is always more expensive than plant protein. Anyway, now we know that proteins are made from amino acids. We know that we eat protein and we break the protein down. We start that process in our stomach, and we continue the breakdown in our small intestine, and we break the protein down to its individual amino acids, which are not destroyed, but are rearranged to form the proteins that our bodies need. We take those amino acids from the food that we eat, and then we reorder them in the ribosomes through protein synthesis, what we just talked about at the end of chapter 3. The DNA tells us the new order of the amino acids to make new proteins for our bodies. We have to have all 20 amino acids present, or we don't have protein synthesis. So that's the primary use of the amino acids. Now, and protein. Now, protein can undergo gluconeogenesis just like fats can. We know that gluconeogenesis, the creation of new glucose, can occur once we've exhausted all the carbohydrates. We can start breaking down fats to make glucose, convert it to glucose. We can do, once we go through the fats, we can then focus on the proteins and start breaking them down to make glucose. This is why a person can survive without food for about 30 days. Without water, we can only survive about 3 days. But without food, we can go for about a month, because we have a lot of reserves that we can burn through. So another thing we find is that our bodies are always in a certain level of nitrogen balance. Normal nitrogen balance, what is taken in is matched by what's broken down. In other words, that's a neutral. That's in a neutral state. We are in balance. You're taking in proteins on a daily basis and making new proteins, and the rate of breaking down old proteins in our bodies that have worn out, for example, is matched by what's coming in. So what's coming in matches what's being broken down, because we get nitrogenous waste in our urine and in our feces all the time, the breakdown of proteins. So we like that. We like to stay in a state of balance. What comes in is matched by what goes out. Children are a little different. Children have a positive nitrogen balance because they're growing. They're always growing until they reach their adult stature. And up through adolescence and puberty and adolescence, and finally the adult stature. So a positive balance means that we're making proteins faster than we're breaking proteins down. Perfectly normal in children. Perfectly normal when we're repairing damaged tissue, because that's what our bodies do. When we have an injury, we repair it. When we have cells that have worn, structures that have worn out, particularly in muscles, we don't replace them, but we repair them. We put in scar tissue. All this stuff is essential here. So we would maintain a positive balance as we are recovering from some type of injury. Negative occurs when we have less protein being made than we are breaking down. So negative breakdown exceeds production, synthesis. Stress can cause this. Stress can create a situation where the breakdown is more rapid than the buildup. Burns can do this. A person who is burned, severely burned, burned down to the bone, and a third-degree burn frequently looks to be very crude about it, I guess. Looks just like barbecue off the grill. And that's what that is, how it resembles, because you have burned a lot of the tissue down to the bone in here. With burns, you destroy lots of skin tissue, and the tissue leaks. We have a lot of water loss there too. So we have so much damage that we are seeing more of a breakdown of protein than we're having a buildup. One of the things that your burn patients have to be monitored for is water loss and infection, because they're creating this warm, dark, moist environment with no protection. There's no protection there from their skin. The skin's burned away, and they're oozing water out constantly. So we have to worry about that. Different types of injuries cause a breakdown faster than others. Dietary things can put somebody into a nitrogen balance, or a negative nitrogen. Dietary concerns can put you into a positive or negative nitrogen balance. An elderly person who eats only cornflakes because they really, really like cornflakes, and that's all they eat, would likely be in a negative balance, because while they're getting their calories and they're getting some nutrients, they're not getting all of their nutrients. They're an obsessive desire to eat cornflakes, or other food groups. If you are focused solely on eating one type of food all the time and nothing else, you're going to be, your patient will be malnourished because they're not going to get all their proteins. They're going to be in negative balance. So nitrogen balance is very, very important to us. Okay. The last thing, of course, that controls protein use is our hormones. Growth hormone. Growth hormone triggers protein synthesis, or an absence of it doesn't allow it to start. Growth hormones, the sex hormones trigger growth during puberty, and then throughout our reproductive lifetimes. We're going to see more protein synthesis taking place in here. So there are a lot of hormones driving the production of our proteins too. Now this shows you what I was talking about, the difference between corn and beans. Everybody knows there's a difference between corn and beans. But here we see there are 8 essential amino acids, from tryptophan down to lysine. I'm not going to read through all the names, but you can see them there. Now, some come only from corn, and some come from beans. We see that corn gives you the tryptophan down through, let's see, corn gives you tryptophan and methionine right here, and beans give you valine through lysine. So if you combine, and these are the 8 you need, from tryptophan to lysine, you need those 8. We don't generate those in our bodies. We can't make those 8 in our bodies. However, a diet of cereal grains like corn and legumes like beans, corn and beans gives you tryptophan and methionine from the corn and valine through lysine from the beans. And you see the overlap right here. And you end up with all 8 amino acids, the essential ones that you absolutely need, that our bodies can't make by combining this. Beans and rice, peas and rice, any of the cereal grains, any of the legumes, the combination of the 2 will give you the 8 essential amino acids. And as a further little twist here, some of the healthiest societies around the world are those who that are low in heart disease, low in cancer rates, low in diabetes and hypertension, are societies that their primary dietary intake is some combination of beans and rice. So for what it's worth, so we see a much more much lower instance of various health conditions, as I said, like heart disease, for example, thanks to this kind of a diet. So those are the proteins. Now let's take a look at vitamins. Many of us have taken vitamins. Many of us take vitamins now. Vitamins are functionally called coenzymes. That's what most vitamins do for us. They function as a coenzyme. A coenzyme helps the enzyme function properly. So it isn't like a coenzyme is not an enzyme. It's not an assistant enzyme. It is, the part of the structural component of the enzyme to make the enzyme work. Most of our vitamins are taken in, orally. We eat them either in the foods we eat or in multivitamins that we take. Vitamin D. Now, if we drink dairy products, most dairy products have vitamin D added to it because vitamin D is not normally present in cow's milk coming out of the cow. So while it's high in calcium, it's generally not high in vitamin D. But vitamin D gets made in our skin. Exposure to ultraviolet radiation allows us to make vitamin D. Vitamin D works by causing our small intestine to absorb more calcium. So when we were kids, it said, drink your milk, it's good for your bones. Well, there was a reason for that comment. What vitamin D does is allows us to absorb the calcium in milk and other dairy products, and to absorb calcium from other sources like different types of plant foods. Like I think the leafy greens are good in calcium. And calcium is essential for building up our bones. Our bones are 90-some%, 99% calcium. So we make vitamin D in our skin. We get it in our diet too. But at some point, if we're not big on eating a lot of dairy products, then we're getting our vitamin D from exposure, simple exposure to ultraviolet radiation. We make vitamin B and vitamin K in our colon. The bacteria that live in our colon, or the large intestine, the bacteria that live in our colon produce vitamin K. Vitamin K is essential in allowing us to plot properly. The whole plotting sequence, when we cut ourselves and bleed, and then the bleeding stops. Because we form a clot. I mean, all bleeding will stop eventually, but we don't want the eventually. We want it to stop as quickly as we can. So bleeding stops because we form a clot thanks to the presence of vitamin K. We'll talk all about that in AP2. Vitamin B is essential for all sorts of things, including different types of protein manufacture and cell structures. Something else you may have heard: eat your carrots; they're good for your eyes. Well, there is a certain truth in that statement. Carrots are orange because of the pigment beta carotene. Telling you that carrots are orange is nothing new, but beta carotene is the pigment that we find in carrots. It makes carrots orange. It makes orange juice orange. It makes oranges orange, if you will. It's also the coloring agent pigment found in various orange drinks, like Sunny D, for example. Beta carotene is converted to vitamin A. Vitamin A is essential for the photoreceptors in our eyes, particularly the ones that function in dim light. And the ones that are around the edges of our eyes, or as we'll talk about that later in the semester in lab, the photoreceptors that are sensitive to low light see things essentially in black and white, they depend on vitamin A. So a person who suffers from some type of night blindness is often advised to at least start eating more beta carotene, taking vitamin A, taking vitamins that are high in vitamin A to help support the retina. So a number of those statements we heard growing up are actually valid. Drink your milk, it's good for your bones, and eat carrots are good for your eyes. Maybe you get one thrown in there about how rabbits have great eyesight too. It has nothing to do with them eating carrots. Anyway, there is no one food group that gives you all of the vitamins we need. Vitamins come in two forms. They're either water soluble or they are fat soluble. And except for the ones that we make in our bodies, like D, some Bs, vitamin K, and A, the rest of them have to be taken in. Now, the water solubles are the various B complexes and vitamin C, the stuff we find in citric acids, citrus fruits, oranges, grapefruits, things like that. Vitamin C is added to lots of different food groups that we eat. Often says vitamin C enriched. You'll get different juices for your kids, and it'll say vitamin C added. Okay, that's good. Makes it better than what it was. It's usually those fruit juices that you buy. If you read if you have a child and you're buying the juice packs or the juice boxes, most of them are only about 10% fruit juice. So at least if it's got vitamin C added to it, it's an improvement. Anyway, so B and C are absorbed with water. B12 is absolutely essential in the production of red cells. B12, and this is very important. B12 is absolutely essential for the production of red cells. and it requires a compound produced in our stomach called intrinsic factor before we can absorb it. If we don't have intrinsic factor or we don't have enough B12, then your patient develops a condition known as pernicious anemia, not enough red cells. We'll talk all about that in AP2. But up until synthetic B12 was developed, pernicious anemia was a death sentence. But there were some pretty disgusting ways to treat it. You know, if you had a patient with B12 prior to synthetic, if you had a patient with a B12 deficiency, if they had pernicious anemia, the standard treatment up until the development of synthetic B12 that didn't need to go through the gut was to eat raw calf's liver every day. So sometimes the treatment might seem worse than the cure or the disease itself. Anyway, B12, absolutely essential. Now, the thing about water-soluble vitamins is that we use what we need in the first hour. So you take your multivitamins in the morning and all the water-soluble vitamins have been used in the first hour after they've been absorbed. And then whatever's left over is removed. You pee them away, if you will, because your body won't use any more than it needs. And so these these various claims on taking mega doses of vitamin C or mega doses of vitamin B complexes do no good at all. They literally are throwing money down the drain because the excess vitamins are useless. They're not going to help. They're not going to fight off a cold virus. They're not going to boost your immune system any more than it would do normally. So there is no benefit. Your patients that are taking mega doses of vitamins are likely doing more harm to their bodies than they are good, because our patients always like to self-medicate, and in some cases it's not a problem. In other cases, it's a very serious problem. The water-soluble vitamins are not a problem because mega doses of water-soluble, like mega doses of vitamin C, body's only going to use what it needs. The rest is going to go down the drain. The fat-soluble vitamins, on the other hand, the vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K are absorbed into lipids and they move into the cell membranes. And then they get stored in adipose tissue. Everything except K. K stays in the cold. A, D, and E can be absorbed and stored in the fat cells. And that can become a problem because they don't go away easily. Mega doses of vitamin A don't give you superior eyesight. Mega doses of vitamin A, the return for a mega dose of vitamin A is negligible. Your body will only use what it needs. You can, your patient can take large doses of vitamin A, or eat lots and lots of carrots, or drink gallons of Sunny D, for example, and the eyesight will, improve if they're having a problem with night vision. If that's all it is, it's an absence of vitamin A, but it won't continue to improve. It'll improve to a point, and then there won't be much point. There will be no more return on investment, if you will, at that point. And now you've got all this excess vitamin A stored in the fat cells. Vitamin D, again, causes, excessive amounts of vitamin D could cause excessive retention of calcium. And that's not a good thing. We don't like to have excessive levels of anything in the body. And there's a condition known as hypercalcemia, where excessive amounts of calcium alter the ability of the cells to contract, alter the ability of the nerves to send nerve impulses. And if we had excess vitamin D, that might happen, because all vitamin D does is tell us to absorb more calcium. Vitamin E also regulates blood clotting, but in the opposite direction from vitamin K. Vitamin E tends to make us a little more squishy and tends to inhibit our excessive levels of vitamin E actually inhibit our ability to clot properly. So just because it's a vitamin, just because it's healthy, as we say with with little quotation marks around it, just because it's healthy and it's apparently natural doesn't mean it's a good thing 100% of the time. A patient that has clotting issues, that are taking a blood thinner because of clotting issues, and starts taking mega doses of vitamin E because they read somewhere that it helps in blood clotting, what they're doing is they're making themselves even more likely to bleed at the site of an injury. The anticoagulants they're taking, the blood thinners they're taking, there's no such thing as a blood thinner, but that's what everybody calls an anticoagulant. It's easier to say, for one thing. A blood thinner is going to make them a blood thinner is designed to keep your patient from throwing a clot when they don't need one, developing a clot, because for whatever reason, they're more prone to clotting. So they're taking a blood thinner. If they're taking the massive levels of vitamin E on top of that, they are making their blood even thinner, even less coagulable, meaning they're less likely to develop a clot. And while that sounds like a good thing, what happens when they cut themselves or bruise themselves and the bleeding doesn't stop? Because they've inhibited their whole clotting process. So in this case, if some is good, more is definitely not better. We need to maintain proper levels of these vitamins in our bodies. We don't want to have excessive amounts. The water solubles are not a problem. It's the fat solubles that create a problem, because they get stored and they get used at higher than what normal levels. Now, another thing that we see the vitamins do is function as antioxidants. Our bodies continue to form free radicals because our chemical reactions are going on all the time. Now, a free radical, I think I mentioned this earlier, a free radical is what peroxisomes help to get rid of. They function as antioxidants. A free radical would be something like sodium with a negative charge on it. Instead of its positive charge, it's an ion. It's an ion or a molecule or a fragment of a molecule that has a negative charge when it's supposed to be positive, or positive when it's supposed to be negative, or just a fragment of a molecule that is causing issues. And they're dangerous because free radicals can go through the cells and through the tissues made up of the cells and cause damage, particularly to the DNA. And free radicals may be one of the causes of why cells decide, on top of the p53 stuff, protection, against, natural pollutants that we encounter, like radiation and chemicals in the air and in the water, nicotine, cigarette smoke, and viruses. We got to remember the free radicals. The free radicals can also damage the DNA or damage the cell in such a way that maybe the p53 gene doesn't work to protect us. So we don't want these free radicals. Now, vitamin C, vitamin E, and vitamin A also function as antioxidants. When something is oxidized, it gives off electrons. that's, we'll learn that. We'll talk about that in a few more minutes here. But oxidation is basically the process of releasing energy and electrons. When you light a match, the match is burning. When you flick a lighter and there's a flame in the lighter, you are releasing electrons. You are breaking covalent bonds in the fuel of the match. You light a candle, you're breaking the covalent bonds in the wax of the candle. Breaking those covalent bonds releases electrons and releases energy. So a candle is stored energy. A match that's not burning is stored energy. Fuel in a cigarette lighter is stored energy. It's all potential energy. We break that when we ignite them. We are releasing electrons. We're releasing energy, in the form of heat and light. That's what oxidation is. When a free radical forms by giving up an electron, or receiving an electron from some other source that gave up an electron. Whenever in normal oxidation, whenever you burn something, you're releasing electrons and you're releasing energy. Those electrons go somewhere. They just don't go randomly floating through the universe. They go somewhere. Some other molecule grabs those electrons. Usually oxygen grabs the electrons, because we can't burn something in the absence of oxygen. Anyway, before I go too far afield on here, when something becomes a free radical, it has been oxidized. And it's given up electrons usually. These antioxidants prevent that. There's lots of dietary sources for antioxidants. Dark chocolate and red wine are normal antioxidants. The leafy greens, the broccolis, the spinach, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, all of these are great antioxidants too, whether you like them or not. This is what they do. And so one of the things that these particular vitamins do is function to prevent or block free radicals from forming. So because free radicals are a real health issue for us. So, and again, mega doses of vitamins are useless. I've said that several times already. Now, minerals. This is the other minor nutrient. We had vitamins and minerals. Minerals, and these are the elements, what we call the elements that our bodies use. Calcium. We use calcium a lot. We use it in our bones. We use it in our muscle contraction. Absolutely essential for muscle contraction, particularly skeletal muscle. We use calcium for nerve impulses. We have, in our heart, we use calcium to cause our cardiac muscle to contract. And calcium takes over the role of sodium in our body. Sodium is, a very important mineral to us in all the organs except in the heart. There it's calcium. Phosphorus in our bones and teeth. Potassium in our plasma and in our cells. It's the inside the water. It's the water inside the cells. The intracellular water is high in potassium. We've got chemical forming bonds that cause proteins to assume different shapes. Sodium is the #1 ion in our plasma. Chloride is in our plasma, but it's just sort of there. And magnesium in our bones. We have to have all of these minerals present. They're absolutely essential. We don't want to have an overload of any of these. I mean, there are conditions known as hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia, where our calcium levels are too high or too low. We have hyperkalemia and hypokalemia. Too much potassium, too little potassium. We can have excessive sodium, and we can have very low levels of sodium in our bodies. And we want to keep everything balanced. We can't have, if some is good, more is not better. Excessive loading of your body with calcium doesn't give you stronger bones. It may initially, but if you continue loading calcium into your body, it's going to lead to some severe health issues, the least of which are going to be kidney stones, but also the fact that the excessive levels of calcium will stop muscle cells from contracting properly, and it will interfere with the ability to generate nerve impulses. And really bad things happen, like muscle contractions that don't stop, or nerve impulses that flatline. So those are all bad things here, just on calcium alone. Hypernatremia, too much sodium. Excessive levels of sodium will prevent nerve impulses from being generated throughout our bodies. The charge on our cells, the minus 90 millivolt charge on our muscle cells and minus 70 millivolt charge on our nerve cells is based on the presence of sodium outside the cell. Sodium is always higher outside cells than inside. Sodium is always leaking in. That's why we're always pumping the sodium out. Excessive levels of sodium will change that charge and the cell will stop working. So we're very, very concerned about all this. We don't want to be hyper or hypo with any of these minerals. It isn't just for bones. Calcium and magnesium and phosphorus are not just for bones. Calcium plays a major role throughout our bodies. Iron, we gotta have iron for hemoglobin. Iron is the mineral that's in the center of the hemoglobin molecule that allows us to attach 4 oxygens to a hemoglobin molecule, and we need that. Iodine, believe it or not, iodine. We don't make thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is absolutely essential for controlling the rate of metabolism. All the chemical reactions in our bodies are metabolism. It's what we call metabolism. And unless we have iodine, we're not going to have a metabolic rate. So we got to have iodine. Where do we get iodine from? We get it from our salt. We get it from salt and from fish, saltwater, usually fish from the sea, ocean fish, not so much freshwater fish, but saltwater fish. And prior to adding iodine to salt, if you didn't live near an area where there was fresh fish available, then you had issues with your thyroid gland and your metabolic activity. Back in 1924, I think, salt started having iodine added to it. And most of the thyroid issues in the United States went away. And of course, sodium and chloride are what we call electrolytes. They dissolve in water into positive and negatively charged particles. Sodium is positive, chlorine is negative. That's chlorine's last contribution. It's functioning as a negative electrolyte. Doesn't do anything else for us. But sodium does all sorts of stuff. Okay, so those are nutrients. The carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, plus the minor nutrients of the vitamins and the minerals. A healthy diet has a balance of these. It stays within the recommended guidelines. We don't want to have excessive loading of any of these. We don't want to take in excessive carbohydrates. Our patients that do that will notice a weight gain because excessive carbohydrates are converted to fat and stored in adipose cells. Lipids create issues create health issues by forming excess levels of cholesterol and the lipoproteins that transport cholesterol around, and we see that excess cholesterol being converted to plaque in the coronary arteries, narrowing the arteries, what we would used to call hardening of the arteries. I guess a lot of people still do call it hardening of the arteries, but really it's atherosclerosis or arteriosclerosis, either term, a narrowing of the arteries due to fat accumulation inside here, as well as weight gain. And you also have hypertension because you're narrowing arteries that increases the pressure inside the blood. The heart has to work harder to pump, and blood pressure goes up. And then also, a person with excess consumption of fats and carbohydrates that does have a weight gain also tends to have issues with adult onset of diabetes. So there's a lot of reasons why you advise your patients to maintain a healthy diet. So now the key to all this is metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions, all the biochemical reactions taking place in our bodies, revolving around the nutrients that we consume. The carbs, the lipids, the proteins, the minerals, and the vitamins. All of this going on here. We protein and we break it down to amino acids, and then we build up new amino acids. We break down carbohydrates, we break them down to release energy, or we store the excess as glycogen. We take in fats, we break them down and transport them through our bodies and use them where we need them. We can store some of that fat in adipose cells and then draw on it for energy, as well as using it to make any of the steroid-based hormones. The two types of reactions that we see in metabolic activity: anabolic reactions. Anabolic, the synthesis, the buildup, the making large molecules from little ones. Think proteins. Amino acids linked together build up proteins, little amino acids. You link them in whatever order the DNA specifies, and you get a protein, whether it's 100 amino acids long or 360 amino acids long, or anywhere in between or even bigger. We make large molecules out of little ones. You take glucose and convert it to glycogen. That is an anabolic reaction. You make, you break fat down. You take the components of fat that's been broken down to a monoglyceride and its fatty acid, and you put it back together again in the plasma as a triglyceride. That's an anabolic reaction. Making large molecules out of little ones is anabolism. Catabolic reactions are taking large molecules and breaking them down. You burn gasoline in your engine, or diesel, you burn it in your engine. You're oxidizing that fuel. You're taking the fuel molecule and breaking it down to carbon dioxide and water and a release of energy. That's a catabolic reaction. Catabolic reactions always release energy. Anabolic reactions always require energy. To build up a large molecule requires energy. And you're actually storing that energy in the large molecule. The reason that there's so much energy stored, so the reason there are so many calories in carbohydrates is because of all the potential energy from all the covalent bonds formed when you make this great big long molecule. There's a lot of energy stored in starch or in glycogen or in those in those fatty acids. Lots of energy. In fact, remember, a gram of fat is 10 calories of energy. A gram of carbohydrates is only 4 calories of energy, because a gram of fat has a lot more, has more covalent bonds with more potential energy in it. Catabolic reactions release that energy. You make large molecules, you break down large molecules, and you end up with the release of that potential energy, and you end up with carbon dioxide and water. Catabolic reactions nearly always end, at least as far as biochemical catabolic reactions, always end in carbon dioxide, water, and a release of energy. So in our bodies are always going back and forth. You light a match, for example. That's a catabolic reaction. Our bodies are going back and forth between building molecules up and tearing them down. You eat an apple and you break down the starch in the apple, or a potato. You break down the starch in a potato. Catabolic reaction. You break that down to glucose, and the glucose is used for energy, and the end result is a release of carbon dioxide and water. If you eat a lot of potatoes, the excess glucose that's formed from the starch is converted back to glycogen, or even more so, converted to fat and stored in the adipose. But catabolic reactions break things down. Anabolic reactions build things up. So, anabolism provides the materials for cellular growth and repair, which doesn't really tell you anything, but that's how we make our polysaccharides. It's how we make our glycogen in our bodies. It's how we make the triglycerides. We assemble the fatty acids, and then we take the fatty acids and link them to the glycerol. That's an anabolic reaction. We take the monoglyceride and the fatty acids, and when we eat fat and we break the fat apart in our small intestine into monoglycerides, one fatty acid chain attached to a glycerol and two fatty acids, then we put them back together again in our lymphatic system. That's an anabolic reaction. Proteins, amino acids linked together to make a large protein molecule. That's an anabolic reaction. And so we always, it always takes energy to do this stuff. Energy is being stored in the covalent bonds. Lots of potential energy. Catabolic reactions break things down. We break down the carbohydrates to glucose, and then ultimately the carbon dioxide and water and a release of the energy. Lipids are broken down to the triglycerides, and then even further, and then they are, of course, built back up. The proteins are broken down to amino acids. So we take large molecules and we break them down. Catabolism, if you light a match, that's a catabolic reaction, because you're releasing the stored energy in the fuel from the match, from the chemicals in the match head, and whether it's a paper match or a wood match, doesn't matter. Energy stored in that fuel source is being released. You light a candle, releasing the electrons from the wax of the candle. You are converting that candle into carbon dioxide and water and a release of energy, because you're releasing the electrons. Anytime something is oxidized, anytime that you burn a candle, burn wood, burn charcoal, burn fuel in your car or truck, that's oxidation. When we burn glucose in our bodies to release energy, that's oxidation. So whether it's fast or whether it's slow, the 4th of July, if you were throwing firecrackers around, that was oxidation. There's no difference between, lighting a firecracker on the 4th of July and, watch or a rocket on the 4th of July, or a mortar or whatever, you like to blow things up or shoot things in the air. There's no difference in hunting and firing your rifle or your shotgun. There's no difference between the oxidation taking place there than watching your shovel rust, except speed. Oxidation is always going to be the release of energy. And it's always going to require oxygen. Now, whether if it's rapid oxidation or slow oxidation, doesn't matter. It's still oxidation. And it is a catabolic reaction. Okay, now. To get the energy we need in our bodies, we undergo a process known as cellular respiration. It's a catabolic breakdown of food. Break down the food to release the energy, the calories in our food. You know, the Snickers bar at 180 calories, the apple at 60 calories. That's a measure of the potential energy stored in that food item. We can break that food down and we can release the energy from that food and capture it in the ATP molecule. ATP, of course, is the currency our bodies use to drag, to bring energy to the cells. We get our energy from glucose, but we can't take the energy right from glucose and release it all at once because our bodies would probably explode. There's that much energy in a molecule of glucose. So we have to release it slowly and carefully. Slowly and carefully. Slowly is a relative term. It comes out pretty fast, but we release the energy in glucose into ATP, and then we send the ATP out to where the energy is needed, and we use it. It's like charging a battery for 7 seconds. That's how long an ATP molecule lasts. We charge up the ATP, send it out to do something. Maybe it's going to pump the sodium potassium pump. Maybe it's going to trigger a muscle contraction. Maybe it's going to trigger a nerve impulse. The ATP molecule will last for 7 seconds. It will do its job and transfer energy, and then it has to be reloaded. So cellular respiration let me start over. Cellular respiration is not breathing. It's nothing to do with breathing. It is the catabolic breakdown of food and causing the release of energy from that food. You know, the 180 calories in the Snickers bar, capturing that energy and then using that to form ATP. Because ATP will always carry a little energy with it every time it forms. We use enzymes in our bodies to attach high energy phosphates to the relatively low energy ADP, adenosine diphosphate, because ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It looks like a nucleotide, but it has 3 phosphate molecules at the end of it. The third phosphate is held in place by what we call a high energy bond. That bond forms between phosphate and the ADP when there's energy available, and we can park energy in that bond. It's a high energy bond. And when that bond is broken, it releases the energy to the cell or to the pump or to the protein to do something. That's what it does. So these molecules, this third phosphate separates from the ATP and attaches to the protein or whatever the structure that needs the energy. That's called phosphorylation. Phosphorylation, attaching a phosphate, that's all it means. And then we do things. We pump the sodium potassium pump. We contract muscle cells. We squeeze food through our digestive tract. Our heart beats. Nerve impulses travel through our brain and throughout our bodies. All of this is done using using the energy contained in ATP. Now we have to use enzymes to do this. And we can't do anything because we're dealing with such microscopically small particles. Here we can't increase the concentration. Remember, we can't increase the concentration, we can't increase the particle size, We can't increase the temperature. So we use enzymes. Enzymes simply work by bringing reactants together. Enzymes have unique shapes for all the different reactants. Enzyme A may only do, may work on reactants 1 and 2, but not 3 and 4. Enzyme B may do 3 and 4, but not reactants 1 and 2. The enzymes refer to these reactants as substrates. They refer to the reactants as substrates. All they do is bring the unique substrates together. Be very specific. They are, as we say, substrate specific. Amylase, for example, breaks down starches, carbohydrates in our mouth. The shape of the active site where the substrates land will only take starch. Nothing else can land on that enzyme and work. The active site, where the active site is substrate specific. What does that mean? It means where the reactants are going to land on amylase. The location on the amylase has a very unique shape just for starch. And it will take two glucose molecules, because starch is nothing but a big long chain of glucose. So someone who's eating a cracker is going to have a lot of starch in their mouth. This is where amylase works. Amylase, the active site in the amylase, the site where the starches can land, is shaped to receive 2 glucose molecules. They're all attached in a chain. They'll fit there, and the amylase will break that bond. And it will continue to do so. It will continue to break the carbohydrate, the starch, into smaller and smaller particles of glucose. And amylase only works on starch. It doesn't work on protein or fats or anything else. It only works in the mouth, because the temperature and pH are specific in the mouth. It won't work in the stomach because it's too acidic in the stomach. So the site where the reactants will land on an enzyme is called the active site. The reactants are called substrates. They land on the active site and then they do something, and that's all an enzyme does is allow a chemical reaction to occur by simply bringing the reactants together. So we have the active site and we have the substrates. So everything about digestion and cellular respiration is controlled by enzymes. So when we start metabolizing food, you ate something this morning, you had a bowl of cereal, you had an apple, you had an egg muffin, you had whatever. So maybe you didn't have anything. But what will happen is when we eat something, at some point today, we'll all eat something. The first thing that happens is we will start the process of digestion. Carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth. Well, all digestion starts in the mouth because we start tearing apart the food with our teeth and mixing it with saliva and swallowing that and pushing it down into our esophagus. The starches start being broken down immediately in our mouth thanks to the amylase in our saliva. We continue the process of digestion in our stomach, where we expose the contents to stomach acids and various proteins that are going to continue the breakdown of the things we've ingested. We finish the process of digestion in the first 10 inches of the small intestine, and then we start absorbing the nutrients. We absorb the glucoses, we absorb the amino acids. We've already broken the proteins down that we've eaten. They're amino acids. We absorb the chopped up fats, because part of the process of digesting fats is breaking them down in the small intestine into smaller pieces. So we absorb those through the simple columnar cells, and then we take them to the liver first, and then we go to the heart, and then they're circulated to the tissues. We get to the cells, and the nutrients enter the cells one way or another. The fats slide right across. The proteins, the amino acids need help, as do the carbohydrates, and the glucoses are broken down into carbon dioxide and water and release energy through a process known as glycolysis. The proteins are reassembled. The amino acids are reassembled in the proteins. The components of the separated components of the fat are reassembled into triglycerides. And then the remaining parts of the carbohydrate molecules are transported to the mitochondria, where we finally end up with a release of a lot of energy and the manufacture of a lot of ATP. So 3 stages here of metabolism: digestion, processing, oxidative breakdown. This is where we finally get into true oxidation. Oxidation of nutrients does not take place anywhere in the cell except in the mitochondria. It's the only place where we use oxygen to break down food. The oxygen that we transport around our cells by using it with red blood cells, transport to all the cells. I mean, every cell in our body is in contact with a capillary, the tiniest of all blood vessels. And they get oxygen from those red cells, and that oxygen is necessary to break down fuel, to release large amounts of energy. So now those of us that are visual, this, and I'm not big on busy charts, but this isn't too bad. Yeah. The first part is digestion. Proteins, carbs, and fats. Proteins are digested to amino acids. We've already said that. The carbohydrates are broken down to glucose, and the fats are broken down to glycerol and the fatty acids. In stage 2, we build the proteins back up from the amino acids. We've transported the fats to the cells. We've transported we've broken the proteins down to amino acids in the stomach. They're absorbed, and the small intestine, they're absorbed, and the amino acids are taken to the cells and they're reassembled as a protein. The carbohydrates are broken down. Let me do the fats first. Fats are broken down to glycerol and fatty acids in the small intestine. They're absorbed, and then they're converted back into the triglycerides, the fats. The carbohydrates have a very interesting process. The carbohydrates that we eat are broken down to glucose. Glucose, if it's excessive or not being used, whatever glucose isn't being used gets stored as glycogen. If there's even more glucose than that than we need, we store it as fat in the adipose. But some of the glucose is oxidized inside the cytoplasm of the cell and releases a little bit of energy. But the bulk of the energy released from glucose takes place in the mitochondria. So everything here is usually taking place in the cytoplasm somewhere. So those are the 3 stages here: digestion, anabolic reactions, and then oxidative breakdown. Now, the energy that our bodies need. Well, first of all, we know what energy is. The classic definition is the ability to do work. We are involved with releasing heat energy. We use light energy for our photoreceptors in our eyes. Sound energy is mechanical energy. We generate noises. We generate a heartbeat. We make gurgling sounds in our small intestine. We hear things. So we depend on sound energy. Electrical energy, we are electrical. You know, I've said several times about the charges on our cells. And so we depend on electrical energy to move, get our muscles to contract and send nerve impulses. Mechanical energy, we're moving things. Our muscles contract, we do stuff. Chemical energy, we're releasing the energy stored in glucose to do work. We can change all these forms from one form to another. When we release heat energy, we can convert chemical energy to heat energy, electrical energy to mechanical energy. We can go from one form to another. Every time we do, we lose more energy as heat. There's always a loss. We don't destroy energy, but we release more energy that is not usable. Heat energy, we don't, we radiate heat, but we don't use it for anything. We depend primarily on chemical energy from the foods that we take in. We oxidize glucose. We strip the electrons off of glucose. We break apart the glucose molecule. We break the covalent bonds in the glucose molecule. We release those electrons and we release energy. That's how we generate chemical energy. And that's the energy we use to power our bodies. The overall process is called cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration has 3 steps. What's known as glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm. It's important to remember on your note, write down in cytoplasm only, inside the cell goop, between the nucleus and the membrane, the cytoplasm. That's where glycolysis takes place. This is the first step of cellular respiration. The second stage is called the citric acid cycle, or better known as the Krebs cycle. And we get a little more energy from that. That takes place in the mitochondria. And the electron transport chain is the big energy payoff. Lots of energy gets released here. And this takes place inside in the mitochondrial membrane. So the only thing that takes place here in the cytoplasm is glycolysis. It's also the least efficient method here. The end result is always going to be the release of carbon dioxide, the release of water, the release of ATP, the manufacture of ATP, stored energy in that third phosphate chemical bond, and the release of heat. 60% of the energy contained in a molecule of glucose comes off as heat. We only get to use 40% of the energy in a glucose molecule. The remaining, the heat that comes off that's released is used to maintain our constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. And so that's why we have a constant body temperature, because we're only getting to use 40% of the stored energy in a molecule of glucose. But on the other hand, our bodies are designed to run at 37 degrees Celsius. So it's not such a bad thing. Okay, this is a good point to stop because okay. Anaerobic reactions. Don't use oxygen. That's what the AN in front of aerobic. Aerobic means use of oxygen. Anaerobic means without oxygen. Anaerobic reactions make a little ATP. Aerobic reactions make a lot of ATP. We don't make energy, but we can make ATP. So, okay, now this is a good place to stop. So I'm gonna stop right here. And we'll pick up here on Monday. There are no labs today or tomorrow. So there are no labs this week. Just easier not to try and get out of sequence. So if you're in a Wednesday or Thursday lab, don't show up. There won't be a class. So anyway, I have 10:58, and I'm going to get us out of here. If you have any questions about anything, shoot me an email. I'll be glad to get back to you right away. So otherwise, I'm going to get out and get ready for my next class. Thanks a lot. See you later.